So, GiantGrantGames actually made a new video on why the next major RTS game will fail. So I'm a big fan of RTS games since my childhood. I played nearly all of them except the Command and Conquer ones. Played a lot of StarCraft, Age of Empires. This was my shit, and yeah, let's react to it. I'm gonna pause in between for opinion stuff. Let's go.
Real-time strategy just isn't popular anymore. Players much prefer MOBAs, shooters, and Battle Royale.
Yeah, but it still has a strong core base,
Developers
I
will
think.
never invest in making one. There's no way to monetize it. No loot boxes or season passes. When a new title releases, it comes and goes with little fanfare. The player base dissipates in a few months, it can't sustain competitive ladder, and the game dies. RTS is a relic of gaming.
For games which are like new RTS games, I see them die like instantly. It's insane. But older RTS games like StarCraft 2, which is the most popular right now, it has still that really strong and insane player base. I think it's like 1 million. And this was the last time was...
As a content creator, I hear people say these things a lot.
It was just an evaluation. I don't know if it's that many.
Honestly, I think they're full of it. People love to call doom and gloom. It's an easy alternative to critical thinking and analysis.
Yeah,
people who remember the good old days of sitting on the gilded throne as the king of esports, declaring that all is lost and the world has left them behind. While I disagree on their diagnosis why, they are correct about one thing. New RTS releases have been consistently bombing.
Yeah, for example, AoE 4, it's a great game itself. Like, the campaign was beautiful and stuff like that. I watched Let's Plays, I tested the beta, and it felt kind of clunky, to be honest. It's not really optimized like StarCraft 2 is. And I'm a really, really big fan of Age of Empires 2. I think that game is nearly perfect, but I still need to criticize that point. And these small things can make
argue that the
or break a game,
with RTS right
especially
now
for RTS.
Not from the players, but from the developers. There's been a fundamental design philosophy shift for RTS. Developers and publishers have lost vision on what makes these games so much fun to play.
They are not bad, they are more mediocre, and being mediocre is pretty bad.
And if they don't change course, they are destined to a fate of mediocrity at best.
Yes.
They're targeting the wrong audience, not focusing on the correct content, and fundamentally misunderstanding who the average RTS player is. And if this doesn't get discussed, it will continue to happen again and again. But why am I qualified to talk about this? In addition to the basic facts that I've played RTS for over 20 years now, have a career based around RTS, and run a large RTS community, I've also worked as an independent consultant for 2 currently unreleased smaller indie titles. This project work acted as the
Heartsfire into
this project. Over the last few months, I've been surveying groups of RTS players, ranging from casual to hardcore, and I've received an absurd amount of feedback. The sample size of my data is currently 7,500 responses, an undeniably healthy data set. Using this data, my experience as a player and as a creator, I'm going to explain why the developers keep missing the mark, what old developers used to do differently, and how they can fix it.
It goes in with a professional.
But before that, even if a developer makes the perfect game, there has to be people interested in playing it. So how many people are playing RTS right now in March 2022? The answer is way more than you think. Getting user data for games can be pretty difficult, so I'm going to have to focus on what is...
Okay, my evaluation right now, I think StarCraft 2 has like 1 million players at best. That's my thinking right now in 2022, and the other games are pretty down with players. Like, the next big one would be AoE 2, and after that Warcraft 3.
Currently the largest.
That's how I think it is.
StarCraft 2. Together, we're going to walk through the steps to reach an approximation of the game's monthly average player base. Unfortunately, Blizzard really hates giving out data about their player counts. Something about WoW's decline being very embarrassing for them to talk about. Thankfully, StarCraft 2 had someone who was the embodiment of passion. And while Blizzard wasn't willing to talk about their numbers, one man was. On November 1st, 2017, TotalBiscuit tweeted, "Oh, and by the way, we've seen the numbers. SC2 has a consistent 1.8 million to 2 million monthly user base the entire year.
Insane.
Co-op is extremely popular.
From 2017, it feels like it's like 1 year ago, but...
And there's a lot more coming. First of all, 2 million monthly users for a 7-year-old game is absurd. But that data is over 4 years old now. It's not going to be correct for today. But thankfully, we do have some nice numbers of ladder games played both in 2017 and now. We can use that data to extrapolate the average monthly player base.
Wait, it actually got bigger?
2022.
What?
The 3 seasons for the year of 2017 averaged 150,000, 140,000, and 131,000 games played per day. This makes a yearly average of 140,000. For the full year of 2021, The average was 193.8 thousand,
Unranked.
a 38.4% increase in number of ladder games played.
This
This
is
growth
insane.
is almost certainly because the game went free to play in 2017,
This is
right
insane.
after this tweet. Unless something incredibly unexpected is happening with the math here, that means that StarCraft 2's active player base is consistently and reliably over 2 million monthly active users. This is almost 12 years
I was
after the
completely
game's
wrong. This
release
is insane,
and 2
man.
years of being with bare minimum support. The reason that new RTSs are failing is not because of a lack of potential players. So the RTS audience exists, but who are they? This might come as a bit of a surprise, but even a decade after StarCraft 2's release, the large majority of players and viewers are casuals. In my survey data, over 3/4 of
I'm a casual.
respondents self-identify as casual players, with under 20% being hardcore. This data lines up fairly well with
Like for me in StarCraft 2, I just learned the control groups. I try not to use my all army hotkey. And yeah, I'm a big casual. I like the arcade ones. I like the co-op ones. I think I played co-op the most and campaign. I always hunted for the achievements, but also important stuff.
comment made by Matt Morris in an interview with Loco back in 2016.
Like most people come into these games are, wings heart. They play the campaign. We see about 80% of the people that love the campaign, and only 20% stick around for the hardcore multiplayer. I mean, these are the really hardcore, engaged, competitive players.
Is that like 80 to 20?
Yeah, it drops like that. So, for a long time we've been saying, how do we help these people stick around? Because they obviously love the game.
While my question divides between hardcore and casual, while Matt Morris talks about co-op and campaign.
Yeah, the thing is, you get absolutely blasted when you instantly join multiplayer. You need to really learn the competitive meta and shit like that. Just build void race and get
there
number
is a
one.
strong correlation between these groups.
Big
It's
man.
not bold to assume that the majority of self-described hardcore players focus on competition and esports, while casuals prefer everything else. Which brings us to error number 1 of most modern RTSs, focusing on competitive ladder and esports. With game releases like Grey Goo and Age of Empires 4, the focus was entirely on multiplayer. The campaign was an obvious afterthought. The AI was garbage, and at times it verged on unplayable. But this is
That's pretty
alienating
bad. That's pretty
80%
bad.
of your audience. In my polls, I asked how important it was for a game to have various aspects for people to give it a try. On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 was not important at all, and 5 was essential. Here's the data for having a campaign, cooperative content, ranked 1v1, and an active esports scene.
Damn.
It's pretty obvious that the development
Damn
focusing...
insane. Like, I only played in Age of Empires 2. I was a bit into the competitive scene. Like, I wasn't one of the big ones, but I knew what the meta shit was, and I just played a lot of 1v1 Arabia. But I still think that the campaign on AoE 2 was the best shit ever, man. I always played that. I watched all Viper Let's Plays from him. He's like the best Age of Empires player in my opinion.
Is
And
not
yeah,
going to draw in the numbers.
Was
To double
insane.
check these numbers, I went hunting through Steam achievements on various RTS games to see how many people are touching the multiplayer. I was shocked to see how low some of these numbers were. Iron Harvest sits at 19.4%, and it's the highest of the bunch. Company of Heroes 2 is 14.2%, Grey Goo 4.7%, and
But to be honest, the Company of Heroes 2 one, the campaign is so fun. Not the campaign, the multiplayer one. The campaign is pretty depressing, but yeah, it's well made.
Ashes of the Singularity a measly 1.8%. Though that last one is probably because everybody who boots that game has their GPU melt. Unfortunately, as far as I can tell, there's no achievement data for Age of Empires 4, but I would be surprised if it were a significant outlier here. So if ranked multiplayer is not the most important thing to an RTS title for most players, why do developers keep focusing on it? It's pretty simple. Selection bias. Developers want to make the best product that they can, and very often bring on active and important members of RTS communities to help give those communities what they want. This is a great idea in theory. These people are very familiar with the scene in a way that developers can't be. But if you're a community member who makes their livelihood because of RTS, you
What a
aren't going to
disgusting
be a
checkpoint.
representative sample of the actual audience. Being a literal RTS professional, be it player or content creator, makes you the definition of hardcore. And yes, that absolutely includes me. Of course the hardcore of the hardcore are going to focus on 1v1. Even when they look at people who they see as less hardcore in their communities, they're so firmly integrated to the competitive community that they only see people with the same interests. I'm not saying it's wrong to create a game that caters solely to hardcore players, but developers...
Yeah, I see the thing that 1v1 is like the most popular thing in competitive thing. I really want like a 2v2 competitive scene or even 3v3, but I think the PCs would melt down because it's too much action at once. Maybe it's much better on the esports scene in AoE 2, where one goes boom, and we have two people defend. But yeah, I can see 1v1 is the most popular thing. It's the easiest thing to balance around, and
know that they are actively
it is what it
alienating
is.
a large portion of potential players by doing so. A tacked-on afterthought of a campaign isn't going to cut it. One more thing about audiences before we move on. There's a common misconception that the right RTS will grab all of the MOBA players and bring them back over from League or Dota. This idea stemmed from the fact that Defense of the Ancients started off as a custom game mode for Warcraft 3, and thus all early MOBA players were RTS players. But Warcraft 3 is almost 20 now. That doesn't apply to the modern MOBA player base.
It stemmed, Defense of the Ancients stemmed from StarCraft 1, I can remember that.
I told about which genres RTS players tend to play, and MOBAs are behind RPGs, strategy games, FPSs, and sandbox games. If you feel like you need to bring in a different audience, you're better off catering towards Halo, Skyrim, and Kerbal Space Program players. Before we move on to the main points, I'm going to switch to Opinion Grant for a moment and talk about stuff.
Okay,
Given the niche I fill on YouTube and Twitch, I interact with a larger variety of casual and newcomers to the RTS genre than almost anybody else on Earth. My focus on campaign-based content makes me a natural springboard for people looking to get into the game. From this unique position, I've heard a lot of opinions and preconceptions about RTS and its players from more or less outside sources. And I think many of these are fairly problematic. StarCraft players in particular love to talk about how freaking hard the game is. How a ladder match is like playing chess and piano at the same time. How it's the most competitive 1 versus 1 game. How you physically can't click on the button to queue a Zerg unless your IQ is over 800. Basically, it's a lot of self-flattery, but it works. People see these views when they're looking into a game to play, and it's not a good thing. It makes people hesitant to try out the game. They're not sure they want to spend the time it takes to learn when the community makes it seem like
it's so worth it, man.
to build a barracks.
Like, I'm like in the process
part of the reason that the casual to
getting into rank in StarCraft 2, and it's a lot of fun.
People are intimidated. My experience with both the StarCraft and Warcraft communities is that once you're inside, they're kind, supporting, and fairly non-toxic. But from an outside perspective, we look like a bunch of self-aggrandizing elitists. So no wonder.
Yeah, the RTS player base, it's not like in League of Legends where everybody just sucks ass, and I hate them. Even though I'm a League player myself, that's a totally different community. I can guarantee you that.
Towards that angle. I think it would be healthy to admit that while professional play is absolutely cutthroat, intense action all the way through, it's not that way for 99% of players. If most people knew most ladder games were more like two drunk toddlers fencing with pool noodles, the intimidation factor would be significantly lower. So with all that out of the way, let's get to the core of this. What did old RTS have that was so successful that new RTSs are not doing? It's worth stating that this is not a blanket truth. Many RTSs have released in the past that have crashed and burned in ways that make recent releases look successful. Instead, we're going to look at the common themes from the three
Age of Mythology.
These being the Age of Empires and Mythology series, Command and Conquer, and the Blizzard RTSs.
Like Command and Conquer generals
that these franchises had that allowed them to rise above and beyond and dominate the market for almost a decade. They are the engine, spectacle, and development tools. To introduce the first pillar, I want to talk about the 2020 release Iron Harvest. This game is awesome. Post-World War I dieselpunk mechs is an incredibly cool and unique setting. The units are stylized and varied from tiny walkers with machine guns to enormous monsters with siege cannons. The visuals are pretty solid, the campaign voice acting is fun, and it's consistently supported with DLC content.
But I think no one plays it.
It's astonishing how uninterested I am at playing any more of it. The game fundamentally fails in its most basic aspects, pathfinding and responsiveness. When a group of units is told to go to one place, they'll split up and head a variety of different directions, making controlling even mid-sized armies a chore. Units are clunky, particularly large units take ages before they're able to execute commands, often creating frustrating situations where your most prized forces are sitting around like dunces while being killed. It relies heavily on a cover system for holding areas with infantry, but the outsides of most buildings can't actually be used for cover, with garrisoning being the only option. The enemy will select a unit of yours to kill, and if pulled back, the AI will charge their most expensive units through your entire army to reach it. I want to like Iron Harvest. I really do, but I just can't. The game fundamentally feels bad to play. Many times when you lose, it's not because the enemy out-tacticked or overpowered you, it's because you're fighting a 2v1 against the opponent and the game's controls. It's worth stating that some games in the past feel like that. StarCraft 1 doesn't feel good to play these days, but it was an upgrade from previous titles like Age of Empires, and then Age of Empires 2 was an upgrade from StarCraft.
Age of Empires,
and that repeats
I injected that game into my veins, man.
Slightly better than the rest until StarCraft 2, where no other modern RTS has matched the pathing or the controls. RTS is a genre where you're going to have to spend significantly more time on the fundamentals.
StarCraft 2 nearly perfected
aesthetics mean nothing if the player is focusing all of their attention on trying to get the unit to move properly. Incredible sound design for attacks is worthless if units can't find their way to the battlefield. In games like shooters, the technical investment is far lower. Engines come with pre-provided tools and developers have a firm understanding of the genre by now. But RTS needs a little bit more care under the hood. For all you executives and project managers out there, it might seem difficult to justify spending all the extra time and money on getting these fundamentals correct. But I promise you that by the end of this video, you will understand that this is not a barrier to entry for the genre, but instead an investment into saving more time, effort, and money down the line. One thing I find incredibly fascinating about the Big Three is they managed to span all of the main settings of gaming. Age of Empires was historical, Command & Conquer was modern fantasy, Warcraft was high fantasy, and StarCraft was sci-fi. Despite the settings being so wildly different, each of these games do a great job with the second pillar, spectacle. Spectacle doesn't need much explanation. Cool things are cool, and using cool things is fun. Age of Empires allowed players to recreate history.
The Attila campaign, man, I loved it.
At the time. Age mythology brought literal deities into the mix, dropping meteors and thunderstorms on your opponent before moving in with an army of minotaurs and chimera. Command & Conquer started fairly average, but it dialed up to 11 with the Red Alert series. Weather control, Tesla coil troopers, zeppelins, mind-controlling enemies to run them into a grinder to harvest them for
insane
resources.
Stuff, man.
It's crazy.
Insane.
Warcraft hit all the fantasy notes. Pillaging your foes with orcs, ambushing as elves, powerful heroes that shape the battles around them. A huge, diverse selection of third-party creeps that can be both fought for rewards and hired as mercenaries. And finally, StarCraft's far-future Protoss facing against the hillbilly Terrans with janky explosives. And of course the Zerg rushes that are so iconic that they've become a basic part of gaming jargon. Spectacle is what you put on the box art, on the Steam page. It's what draws people in, and then starts to get them thinking. When things are crazy and wild, the player gets excited to find new interactions and combos. Ways to rush towards their favorite unit, ways to make it work even if it's a little bit underpowered. As the design focus has shifted towards multiplayer first, a lot of spectacle has been cut. Decimating armies with an invulnerable Soviet tank line with the Iron Curtain just isn't fair in multiplayer. You can't have Yuri mind control enemies and grind them up for cash, it's too cost efficient.
This?
When the design is for multiplayer first, you inevitably
Just completely
cut
new
things
for
that
plays
could
or
be
what?
selling your product. A good example of getting this balance right is StarCraft 2.
So we had all these ideas while developing StarCraft 2 that we thought were pretty cool. We had units like the Diamondback, which is this tank that can move and shoot at the same time. Well, it turned out it stepped a lot on the Marauder. It stepped even a little bit on the Siege tank in terms of its role. These units were too similar. And it wasn't actually that easy to control. It was actually very difficult to manage what this thing was shooting at while you're moving it. This guy wasn't for esports. We had a Spectre. It's a new type of ghost. This guy's going to be cool. Oh, okay, well now we got two ghosts. You're going to pick one. You're not going to use the other one.
Yeah.
And we didn't really want to cut the ghost. It seemed kind of core to what StarCraft was all about. So not for esports, the poor Spectre. But these are all cool. These are all units that in any other game I've ever worked on, I absolutely would have put in. But since those other games weren't designed to be an esport, they made no sense for StarCraft. But we wanted them in the game. We felt like we've done the art. They're fun units to play with. Why should the consumer not have the opportunity to play with these? And so we tried to find places we could put these.
Damn.
Though I would argue that they didn't go far enough. Originally, the Thor was going to be a unit so massive that it had to be built by SCVs on the field. Battlecruisers were going to have custom
my
weapon
God, I
attachments with
remember
plasma
this.
torpedoes that had to be individually
I remember
upgraded.
watching this.
The mothership could stop time, crack planets, and create insta-kill
so
black
insane.
holes. The fact that we never got to play with these is honestly disappointing. I'm
The
not
black
saying
hole
that competitive
one.
multiplayer should be filled to the
Damn.
brim with broken game-ending superweapons, but I feel like each faction should be designed with absurdity in mind. Make it ridiculous for the single-player experience, and then trim it down to what's fair for multiplayer. Boring, uninspired units and abilities are all too common in recent RTS. Cool stuff sells. At this point, you have a game with a strong fundamental base. You've designed bombastic, over-the-top units to energize and inspire the player base, but you don't get to make a game just yet. Now is the time to put effort into making a great editor. Not just a good editor, a great editor. This is the final pillar of successful RTS.
I spent like...
Terrain, mission scripting, triggers, cutscenes, and even the AI should all be created inside
Damn,
of the
this is insane. Like, I spent so much time just being the editor. I just made a bunch of units and let them fight each other at the end. But yeah, it was fun, man.
Editor. It is the Swiss Army knife that creates every piece of the game that the player interacts with. We all know the gaming scene has changed in the last 20 years. You can no longer get away with launching a product, a year later popping out an expansion, and calling it a day. Games as a service is the new normal. The new goal is the constant progressive creation and distribution of content in a game so that the players will continue to stick around. A powerful editor allows developers to create that content at a rapid pace. Take Age of Empires 2 for instance. The game initially launched with 5 campaigns, and as time went on, due to having a well-designed editor, campaigns have continued to be made and sold. As of writing this, the game has a staggering 33 available campaigns with almost 250 missions. This is an incredible amount of content to be pushing out, a constant way to reliably draw players back into the ecosystem, getting them hyped for the next content release. A powerful editor also gives the flexibility to capitalize on things that have accidentally become successful. StarCraft 2's co-op commander system was initially a tiny side project when it debuted in 2015. It was considered less important than Legacy of the Void's campaign, the mission packs, and of course the star of the show according to Blizzard.
The best decision they've made on
Well, it turned out Archon mode sucked and was a complete failure. But co-op was incredibly successful, and Blizzard was able to rapidly expand on it, turning it from a selection of 6 heroes
to Archon mode was more mean.
As well as adding in the mutator and prestige system for massive levels of replayability off of a very small development team. If the editor they were working with was not as robust, flexible, and easy to use, that opportunity would have left them by the wayside. But now I have to admit, I've been a bit misleading so far. I said that these 3 pillars provided the support that old school RTSs had that led them to greatness, and that modern releases failed because they didn't have them. But that's not exactly it. These pillars serve as the catalyst for the true reason. What is the most powerful force in all of gaming? The critical core of the genre that has been lost, and must return for a successful game. Of course, I'm talking about player-generated content.
Yes.
ModDB is a website for modding games, with a focus on older titles. It's not as big as places like the Steam Workshop.
If Skyrim wasn't moddable, I think it would have died like instantly. After a few years, no one would talk about that. But the mods really kept the game alive. It's true.
This mods, but it's been around for a while. Slightly more recent games like Minecraft,
especially Minecraft, made
there.
That's so true.
Some of the bigger titles from the old days like Half-Life and GTA San Andreas have almost 9 million mod downloads. That is a lot, but it's also unsurprising. GTA and Half-Life are not just big brands, they're cultural juggernauts in gaming. What is surprising is that both of these are dwarfed by Medieval 2 Total War's 11 million downloads and Command & Conquer General's 13 million. But why? These are both good games, but neither are iconic pieces of gaming history. RTS is specifically well suited towards user-made content. The top-down perspective is significantly less restrictive on creative freedom than the first or third-person cameras. An RTS with a good editor serves as a blank canvas for an inspired creator to build what they want. And while the average creation might be pretty mundane, there have been multiple instances where entire genres have been spawned from these editors, like tower defense and MOBA. The reason that the focus on custom content was dropped was largely due to emulation. Developers saw that StarCraft 2 launched with a pretty terrible custom games section and determined it wasn't an important part of their own arcade. But this wasn't an intentional act by Blizzard, it was the arcade not being ready in time. I would argue that the 2 years it took for a good system to play user-generated content with people was StarCraft's greatest flaw, and that copycats are not following success,
I played this one a lot.
In the early 2000s, RTS had a dominant player-generated content scene. In 2010, with the launch of StarCraft 2, that dried up. It's not like that creativity and passion to build has disappeared. It just went somewhere else. Because 1 year later, in 2011, Minecraft launched. And if you ask anybody aged 12 to 22, they can firmly tell you that while Minecraft was fun on its own, The best part was the mods. There was an
Exit.
absurd selection of unique game
The
modes that
minimap was
captivated not
important, of
just
course.
audiences, but also viewers, launching countless careers of Minecraft YouTubers who explored, highlighted,
was
and
insane,
played
man.
through these. The players
Good
were
old
given
times.
a powerful tool to create, and proceeded to do not only that, but also organically market those creations to both each other as well as the wider world, with minimal developer input. This has proven to work not only in Minecraft, but in other games as well. Skyrim is famous for its insane levels of modability, and it just so happens to be the best-selling RPG ever if you don't include Pokemon. The best-selling Halo game is Halo 3, which just so happened to be the one that includes the Forge, which was by far the best way to create and share custom games in a shooter at the time. Kerbal Space Program spent the majority of its life as a bare-bones spaceship simulator brought to life by the easy-to-use CCAN mod manager. And don't even get me started about Half-Life mods, where people created niche modes like
Oh my
Counter-Strike
God.
and whatever the heck Gary's
I can
mod
remember
is.
back in the day when my cousin from Spain, he was here chilling, and he played Counter-Strike Source. I thought, what is this game? And you can shoot people. And he downloaded it me over Soft Onic over a cracked site, and I had a lot of fun, man. Probably had a virus on my Windows Vista laptop, but it was worth it, man.
And despite all of these high-profile hits
it
and
was fun.
Minecraft being the best-selling game of all time, none of them are the most successful game to follow this formula. Roblox is. I'm going to put aside the questionable ethics of the Roblox Corporation right now. People Make Games already did a great video on that topic. And instead, just focus on the numbers. Roblox is only a platform for users to create games, share them, and play each other's creations. Roblox has 200 million monthly active users.
What the
At the
hell?
time I'm writing this, Roblox has the same number of players as the top 3 Steam games combined. This formula of making a solid basis for players to create custom content
Insane, man.
works. It was proven with Battle.net in StarCraft 1. It was reaffirmed with the custom games section of Warcraft 3. It was driven to ridiculous proportions with Minecraft. And then Roblox came and drove the point home. RTS is a great platform for making this content. This content
Weird
is
times.
immensely popular. The RTS player base skews towards older gamers. And right now, there is a large number of now older gamers who grew up with Minecraft. The math makes sense. Throughout the entire history of RTS, the common theme between the dominant titles has been creator agency.
Never played Warcraft
There's
1
a
and
fundamental
2.
limit to what a development team can do
I
for
was
a
way
game.
too young for
They
that.
can only make so much content, and after release, they're stuck in maintenance mode, running around putting out fires and squashing bugs instead of developing new content. When the community is empowered, the creation process can continue. When things are created and promoted,
Was it the
they draw in
realistic
more
size
players.
mod?
And when more
What the
players are
hell?
drawn in,
Void rates,
some
man.
of them will become creators. This is the feedback loop that is key for creating a successful title. When you log into an RTS that's destined to fail, you log into a campaign and a 1v1 ladder. But for the kings of the genre, it's not just these things.
Oh,
it's a MOBA,
the
a
Mothership,
unit
the
spawn,
Warship
a tower
Mountain
defense, a
arcade.
hero arena, a Sims
I played
game.
it a lot
It's
too.
a cat and mouse, Mario Party, and Risk. It's even this weird Toho anime thing that I absolutely know nothing about, but if I did, Marisa would be best girl, don't at me. It's an auto battle, a card game, a tug of war. It's Mafia, Bejeweled, and a typing game. It's a freaking MMO shooter. It's a way to be competitive and a way to play with your friends. None of these things were made by the developers, but all of them were made possible because of the developer. The reason that the next RTS will fail is a fundamental misunderstanding of what the S in RTS stands for. The first developer who understands that the S is not strategy, but instead stands for sandbox, will be the new king of the playground. Thanks for watching. If you want to see for yourself some of the amazing work of the StarCraft 2 modding community, check out my daily uploads channel, GiantGrantGames Archives. I'm currently playing through Legacy of the Tal'Darim, a fun mod
Yeah,
where
I
you
always watch GiantGrantGames. He does great content. Like I watch the StarCraft campaign videos where he tried to rescue in each and every single character. It was fun, man. And I also watch him on Twitch if he is online. Yeah, that's it. Thank you for watching. If you even survived to this point. And yeah, leave a subscribe to GiantGrantGames and to me too if you don't mind. And I'll see you next time with more reaction content and guides or different games like I do Elden Ring, Lost Ark stuff. Typical shit right now, which is pretty popular. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Wafer out.